Episode 20. J-Law POV. She was called to the conference room on Eric's floor of the building. It was 11 in the morning, and she had been back at work for just 2 days, and she had been diligently trying to catch up on her caseload. Although most of her clients had been very understanding of her situation, as it was very public knowledge what had happened to her, Eric had published one of her photos of her injuries sustained. She hadn't been all that happy about it and had only allowed the one where she was still fully clothed, the original photo of how she looked upon being rescued, before the police had stripped her down to document all the injuries. Reporters were still camped outside her office building to try and get an interview with her, to which she had so far refused. As she walked into the conference room, she saw not only Eric Stanton seated at the table, but also all the senior partners of the law firm. She drew in a steady breath when they all turned to look at her. Some had pity in their eyes, others had admiration, and a few didn't seem too concerned at all. Eric nodded to the seat next to him. She walked over and sat down as was directed. "What's going on?" she asked him quietly. "Mr. Browning is about to hold a live broadcast press conference. We as your attorneys were informed by his attorneys to watch it. It's about your case against him," he informed her. J-Law froze. This was not going to be good. Why was he even responding in the human world way? No wolf cared for that stuff. If it wasn't wolf in society, then it didn't matter. She had in all honesty thought he would just sever her tie with the pack and then let his pack lawyers sort it all out for him. Not wanting to deal with her in the human world, currently she actually felt safe. For if she suddenly went missing again or anything happened to her, it would all point directly at her alpha, and he would be dragged back into the human world's spotlight of suspicion, be investigated again. J-Law knew he would not want that at all. This was likely going to be a blanket statement from one of his pack's legal team in order to placate human world public opinion. She could only imagine his human world businesses had taken a hit, that his stocks in his companies had probably fallen as well. Not that she was keeping track. In fact, she had refused to watch the news in the past 10 days since her ordeal. Not wanting a reminder or a recap of it, she had lived it, that was enough, and she didn't want her children to have to see her in that state again. The TV was turned on, and to her surprise, she watched as he strode toward the podium setup outside the front of one of his businesses. Behind him in the background, all wearing immaculate dark gray suits with black shirts and red ties, pack official colors, were Jackson, Stephen, and Ethan. As he walked directly towards the podium, she could see his muscles straining against his suit. He was wearing a black suit with pinstripes, probably gray, she couldn't tell from here, a dark gray vest over a black dress shirt that matched the boys' suits, and a red tie, his alpha dress code. Cora stood to attention, her ears pricked up instantly, and she too was watching. She had not gotten to see him that day, having been kept forcibly away due to them being drugged with wolfsbane and the use of silver cuffs. She whined as she laid eyes on him for the first time since leaving the pack. The father of her pups. He was dressed to kill, that was for sure. No female reporter would ask him anything that would incur his angry look directed at them, and that was how he most likely wanted it. He wanted all of them drawn to him, she supposed, their lust and desire eradicating any torrid questions that might make him unseemly to the public eye. He was clean-shaven, and his hair neatly slicked back the way he liked to wear it. He looked better with it slightly tousled, she though absently, Cora agreed. J-Law checked herself. "Stop looking at him. Remember what he did to you," she told herself internally, also reminding Cora she could feel that her wolf was more interested than she should be, probably due to their connection through the triplets, but it must be kept in check. He cleared his throat casually and tapped the microphone. "I will make a short statement this morning regarding Miss J-Law Freeman and what happened between us." He hushed the reporters with a simple wave of his hand as several questions were yelled at him from many reporters. "Firstly, I would like to apologize to my childhood friend. Yes, I have known J-Law since we were small children." He was trying to establish a friendly long-time relationship with her and gain the report's trust, she thought. Sneaky bastard, but not to be unexpected. If she was his lawyer, she would have suggested as much. "My apologies, J-Law. Yes, I did send for you to return to our hometown. I, however, did not order for you to be kidnapped, drugged, or injured in any way at all." J-Law snorted. "Yeah, right," she thought. "I received that black envelope and the wolfsbane inside it. Your intent was clear. Very clear. I was also completely unaware of your single mother status. as not having spoken to you in 6 years. If I had known you were a mother of 5-year-old triplets, I would certainly have never, ever sent men to bring you home. I would have come myself, to your very door." Fear was starting to creep into her every fiber. He knows he was speaking directly to her, letting her know that he had fully investigated her and found out about the triplets, her children. His children. Their children. That she had kept from him. "I did send 3 letters prior to this particular unfortunate incident to request that you come home," he went on. "My intent was to simply discuss with you your outstanding debt to my family in regards to us having paid for your law school tuition, which was to be repaid by you by working in the Browning Corporation's law department over the course of the first 5 years out of school, which you agreed to do and even signed a contract for." Oh, his lawyers were good. They were trying to make it out that she was the one in trouble, not him, redirecting the reporter's focus to her and her outstanding debt that she owed to him. Bastard. He produced the document which she recognized as the PAC agreement for her tuition fees for 5 years, legal work with reduced wages to pay the money back. Due to the current circumstances and the unfortunate and terrible incident that has happened, which deeply upsets me, I would like to take this opportunity to try and offer an olive branch to you. First, this contract gone. She watched as he tore it in half. "You owe me nothing. I consider your monetary debt repaid. I would not wish to cause you any more grief or harm by forcing you to repay this sum of money. Secondly, I would like us, you and I, to sit down and mediate the current issue between us. Please take into consideration our long-standing friendship, Jayla. You know very well I never laid a hand on you. Your statement on record says as much. You fully acknowledged that all harm that was done to you was by the men who took you against your will. Thirdly, I would like the opportunity to personally apologize to your children for any distress or mental trauma they may have suffered due to your disappearance or your current injured state upon returning home. I am certain they were very upset and distressed, and I would like to personally assure them I am of no threat to you or them for that matter. None whatsoever." Jayla noted that his eyes never left the camera in front of him. A shiver ran down her spine. He was speaking directly to her, letting her know he wanted to come for his children, her precious babies. Not going to happen. If he forced the situation, it would all backfire on him, and the humans would all badmouth him again, for they had human birth certificates, and he was not on any of them. "I'll take questions now," he informed the reporters. Episode 21. "You said you grew up as childhood friends? Is that actually true?" A reporter yelled from the crowd. "Yes, Jayla and I were once very close indeed." He smiled, that devastatingly handsome smile of his that could make any she-wolf or human woman's heart melt, and she didn't miss the insinuation in his voice that belied they had had more than a friendship, implying with one sentence they were lovers. "How close?" another reporter yelled out, a female voice. "We dated for a time, just over a year if my memory serves me correctly." His mouth twitched at the corner, a suggestive smile. "Then how could it come to this?" "Kidnapping and grievous bodily harm you're charged with, yes?" a male reporter yelled. His smile was gone in an instant. "Correct, those are the charges." He did not deny it. "However, I would like Jayla and I to sit down and mediate the matter, as it is not what it seems. It is all a simple misunderstanding that can be resolved with common sense." He looked right at the camera. "Jayla, please agree to meet me. All your lawyers are welcome. I will agree to any time and place that suits your schedule." He then simply stepped away from the podium and walked away. Jayla watched as Jackson, Stephen, and Ethan all followed him back into the building and out of sight. Many eyes in the room turned to look at her. She knew what they wanted to know, so she answered them. "Yes, we went out for a while. It ended badly," she stated flatly, for it had ended very badly. She had lost everything, and he had gained everything. Even right now he was trying to take more from her. She wondered if he had told his Luna yet, or if she was still in the dark about his 3 pups. The TV was turned off. Jayla got up and walked away. She wished she'd never had to watch his press conference. He had used his sex appeal and his charm to sway the crowd, probably filled it with female reporters at his request. He knew he was devastatingly handsome and would use that to his advantage. All wolves do. It's how they got away with things in the human world: charm and sex appeal. Due to the constant training, most wolves had the body type desired by all humans. Trim, taut, and terrific, or muscled up to the hilt is what she heard most humans say. Humans as well as wolves loved a good 6 or 8-pack abdomen and deep V-lines that dropped off down into their jeans. Drool-worthy. She walked into her office and stood staring out the window. It was an overcast day, and there was no sun shining. Good matches my mood, she thought absently. She was not simply going to give up her children to him, no, Cora agreed. She turned at the sound of her door closing and found Eric Stanton walking towards her. She knew she had left the conference room before they were done with their questions, but she just didn't want to deal with it, with him, to be honest. Did I miss something? Or did I read between the lines correctly? He stated without hesitation, staring directly into her eyes. Now that depends on what you read between the lines, Eric. Jayla said calmly. He was no fool, and she was certain he had picked up on the underlining tone of the press conference. Her children. Is Nathan Browning the triplets' father? Eric asked, as direct as always. His gray eyes boring into hers, daring her to lie to him. Yes, she stated honestly. I told you before I was kicked out at 20 that he was the one to remove me from the corporation. I did not know I was pregnant at the time. Why didn't you tell him when you found out? He was getting married when he kicked me out. She shrugged. I didn't want to ruin that. That is not who I am. I honestly was happy for him. Eric stared at her for a long moment. If you didn't know you were pregnant, you can't have been that far along, and you said he was getting married. How long between your relationship with him and hers with him?
Trust Eric to pick up on that.
I'll be totally honest with you. He broke up with me and was engaged to her within a matter of a day. She sighed. It had been that quick, but in the Wolfen society, that's just how it was. Once you found your mate, nothing else mattered. Eric stared at her, completely shocked now. No wonder it ended badly. I guess you did a lot of yelling and screaming. No, actually, I didn't. We weren't serious. I knew that, but unfortunately she slapped me in the face, and I slapped her back. Hence not a good ending, she shrugged again. She had spoken the truth. He was thinking, his arms now folded across his chest. It was a good minute before he spoke again, so what response do you want to make? He returned to his original reason for coming to her office. I don't know yet. She walked over and sat down behind her desk. I need to think about it. Do you think he's going to order a paternity suit? I doubt it. It was clear he had no doubts about the triplets being his. A paternity suit was not necessary. A custody battle, then? Jayla sighed heavily and rubbed her temples. Not in the human world, she thought. Episode 22. No, he'll just come along and claim what is his regardless, Cora piped up. I know, Cora. It's just a matter of time. Unless we play hardball and stay publicly in the human world, then stay we will. Hardball it is, Cora huffed, clearly willing to fight for her pups, even against an alpha. Cora was just as defiant as Jayla was herself. She and her wolf were well suited to each other. Jayla. Eric's voice interrupted her internal dialogue with her wolf. I don't know. He'll probably wait for my response before making a decision. He is very careful in his decision-making process, and he will be tactical in his approach. He'll want to make sure it's all in his favor before starting a battle of any kind. Give it a day, or 2 or 3, to come up with a response to his press conference. Jayla chuckled. Make him sweat, you mean? Yes. Let him get annoyed and aggravated. It might just show his true colors to everyone watching. All right, I will think up a response. She nodded and watched as Eric walked out of her office. Just don't piss him off, Jayla. Cora huffed. This is a battle, but technically we can't win it. I know. He's an alpha and has all the power in Wolfen society, but Cora, we are in the human world, and only so much weight can he throw around without outing our kind. Do you really want to go to battle with him? Cora asked, and Jayla could feel the worry ebbing off her wolf. She was currently pacing around in her mind as she tried to decide what course of action she would agree to go along with. Nathan POV. 3 days passed before he got to see his mate on TV. 3 long days for her to respond to his press conference. It was 19:30 his time, 16:30 hers. End of the day for her. He wondered if that was on purpose, or probably. Nathan was under no illusion as to whether she understood that he knew about the triplets being his. He had made that very clear to her. No one else may have picked up on it. Only wolves themselves would understand the importance of an alpha stating he'd have gone right to her door, and his personal assurance to her children that he was of no threat to them. But to the humans watching, he just looked like a man knowing he was in deep trouble and trying to dig his way out of a hole. There was a podium set up out the front of Stanton and Co. law firm. A whole team of lawyers were lined up behind it. He counted 10, and Eric was not among them, he noted. He was sitting in his office along with Jackson, Stephen, Ethan, and both his parents. A loud growl came from Havoc the moment he saw her. Eric Stanton was walking right next to her, and his hand was on the small of her back. He looked extremely close and cozy with her. Barely an inch between them was this his way of laying claim to her in view of the public. Nathan didn't know, but he too did not like it either, and Havoc was stalking around in circles, ropeable at seeing even a human male's hands on his mate. It didn't help that she was dressed very provocatively as far as they were concerned. She was wearing a black silk blouse that clung to her body in all the right places as the wind pressed it against her slender waist and ample breasts he knew fit perfectly into the palm of his hands, and that bloody black and red checkered skirt, skin tight all the way down to the bottom of her backside, then fell into pleats that were maybe 3 inches long. The pleats flicked up as she walked, leaving her legs bare for all to see from her high thigh area all the way down to the black stilettos she wore. Packed colors, her realized. Her makeup was perfect for her, lightly done, showing her natural beauty, her supple lips a dark purplish pink hue that made him want to just kiss her until it was all gone. He just wanted to reach up into her hair that was wound tight into a bun and yank her hair loose, pulling her head back roughly with a fistful of her hair, making her pretty mouth gasp open for him to ravish and possess like never before. Havoc was prowling and snarling in his mind, knowing every man could see what was his, knowing they were thinking about touching her, probably more than touching her. She should never dress like that except for him. She would understand that when they got their hands on her. Skirts that short were a no-no unless in their bedroom. Eric walked her all the way to the podium, then leaned down and spoke directly into her ear, his lips brushing against the skin. Havoc wanted to rip the TV off the wall and destroy it right there. She turned and smiled up at him, a genuine smile, a happy smile. Nathan's fists balled on his knees. He wanted to punch that man as much as Havoc wanted to rip his head off. She should only ever smile like that for him, not some bloody human male. She turned to the crowd and nodded, the smile disappearing. Thank you all for coming today. I would like to make a personal response to Mr. Browning's statement from 3 days ago. I would like to ask you all hold any questions you may have until the very end. I will answer 3 questions and nothing that is pure speculation or only asked to create gossip. Nathan couldn't help to smile. So very professional. She had clearly done this many times before. He was very proud of her for attaining her law degree and commanding so much respect. He'd always known she was bright and intelligent, that she would make a great lawyer, and he had told her as much when they had been friends and lovers. Told her he knew she would make a great asset to the PAC's legal department. Sometimes she had even blushed at his compliments. Goddess, he wanted her back. He refocused his thoughts as she took a deep breath to make her response. Then those jewel green eyes turned directly to the camera, just as he had done. So darn beautiful. I do not believe you meant me no harm, Mr. Browning. This letter you sent, with clear intent. She held up the black envelope addressed to her and the letter as well. He recognized it right away. It states clearly, I will have you brought in, and inside the letter was this vial. She produced the long cork-stoppered vial with a single wolfsbane flower in it and tapped it on the top of the podium gently. To those watching today, this flower is known as wolfsbane and is poisonous. The drug that was detected in my system, forcibly injected by the men who took me that day on your order, which you have admitted to sending them to get me, was in fact found to be wolfsbane, the very same thing as this flower. She tapped the vial on the top of the podium again. Sent by you, Mr. Browning. He was frowning now. This was not how he had thought this was going to go at all. Did he even want to hear the rest? Probably not, but he would not miss the opportunity to see her with his own eyes no matter what. As for the monetary debt to you and your family, she held up a check. I will pay it back. This check for the full amount will be in the mail directly after this press conference, and my legal team, she indicated the men standing behind her, have even calculated any interest owing, and it has been added. as my way of showing you I mean to be free and clear of you. No lingering debt, period. Episode 23. Havoc was snarling now. He was very unhappy with this turn of phrase. Nathan had to remind him that she did not yet know they were her mate. As for the mediation which you requested, I am not interested in hearing what you have to say. The courts will decide if you are guilty of the charges laid against you. I think that you know as well as I do what happened. She tapped the vial on the podium again. I also know that I did try to contact you within your 3-day time limit given to me. My phone records will show as much. I also believe you know this to be the truth as well, as I called the number on this letter. Your right-hand man, Jackson, picked up the phone if I recall correctly. I am also not interested in you personally meeting my children to apologize to them. I would advise you to stay away from me and my children. Deal directly with my legal team. I believe you know of Eric Stanton by now. He is the head of my legal team. Eric stepped forward to the podium. Please direct all further questions, queries, or statements to me personally. Please, Mr. Browning, any further harassment of my client will only add extra charges to the list you already have. He then stepped back. I'll answer 3 questions now if you have any, she offered to the gathered crowd. He heard many questions yelled at her. She would have the opportunity to pick and choose which to answer. The first she chose to answer, did you really grow up with Mr. Browning, within the Browning Corporation? What a useless question, Nathan thought. She had produced a check to repay him. It was clear she had. It was a question that didn't need clarification, and she knew it. Smart girl. One question completely wasted by the reporters. Yes, I did. The second question she answered. Why did you leave and not return to fulfill your contract? I was told to leave by Mr. Browning himself, and told not to come back ever. I simply obeyed his order. This answer allowed the crowd to feel that she had no debt to fulfill, he supposed, making it seem as though he was in the wrong again. The third question, Miss Freeman, do you really believe he meant to harm you? Unfortunately, yes, I do. There was an actual hint of sadness in her voice that reached her jewel green eyes. They seemed to dull somewhat with her reply. It hurt him deeply to know she really believed he would harm her. His chest ached. Nathan sighed. Havoc was furious. So her stance is to defy him yet again, and very publicly in the human world, where it is hard for him to get to her right now, this very moment, due to current circumstances. J-Law looked directly at the camera and sighed heavily. Mr. Browning, if you would like to formally remove me from your corporation, go ahead. I will find another to affiliate with. Then she simply turned and walked away, Eric right there beside her, his hand on the small of her back again, and her 10-man legal team followed. He could feel all eyes on him. J-Law was indeed outright defying him. She had just told him to sever her from the pack, and she would find another to join in. Did she even know how dangerous that would be for her and their pups? Yes, any pack could take them in, then kill her and his pups, or spend years harming them, torturing them or enslave them, using them to hurt him. If they got wind that she was his mate, she would suffer the worst fate. He could not have that. I want round-the-clock warriors at her apartment building. I want the pups watched at their school as well. No interference for now unless danger arises, he stated flatly. He would protect what was his even if he wasn't allowed to do it himself. He would send everything to protect them. This was extremely serious and dangerous. For such an intelligent person, how could she be so bloody stupid? Any wolf watching this event unfold in the human world would understand exactly what she had meant. His enemies would all be creeping out of the woods to try and entice her to them. Would she even know who they were? Who to avoid altogether? He doubted it. Jackson was already on the phone, as was Stephen. It was the first time Stephen had spoken in weeks in front of Nathan. His gamma blood, he guessed, was boiling in his veins, his need to protect her and the future heirs to the pack outweighing whatever had kept him quiet all this time. Son, he heard his father's voice. I know, he said in reply, trying to keep fear for his mate and pups out of his voice. I can sort it out. I'll fix it, he muttered. Havoc was not happy. He didn't believe he could fix it. I fix it. He snarled inside Nathan's mind. Just need to go to Cora. Might not work, Havoc. She's truly upset at us. She needs time to calm down. We have to plan to keep them safe, then make a decision about bringing her in again, and how to do it so the human world doesn't see it as another kidnapping and send the feds again. Might take some time, buddy. I won't give up. I want her back too. Promise, his beast asked. I swear to you, Havoc, by the goddess. I will get her back. She will recognize us as her mate, and everything will fall into place. Son, you know your mother, and I have to go away to help your brother deal with his human mate and her very stubborn family. Yes, go, I'll be fine. Nathan, his mother touched his shoulder. We'll try to see her. We'll be out that way. Episode 24. Thanks, I'd appreciate that. He truly would. If anyone could talk her down and bring sense back to her, it would likely be his mother, who still held Luna's rank in the pack. His pack wolves were still attracted to her and wanted to take comfort from her and listen to her advice. His father would be the other person she would listen to. He was the alpha she trusted. The man she had gone to and begged and pleaded for help when she was here last, had even shown him her pups through his gift, a risk that he would recognize them right away, a risk she had been willing to share with him in order to save herself. She trusted him. Other than her own parents, his were probably the best option to help in this horrid situation, which was getting worse by the minute it seemed. With every move he made, it seemed the more defiant his mate became. I will punish mate when she comes home, Havoc growled. You will not. We need her happy and feeling safe. Nathan shot back at him instantly. Havoc punishing her was not a good idea. When his beast was angered, everyone suffered. I will spank her good and proper. Havoc chortled. Nathan relaxed and couldn't help but laugh internally at his wolf. She might like that punishment. Havoc snorted at him. Want to hear mate's voice? Me too. Nathan nodded. But would she pick up? Only one way to find out, he thought. She had to know after that last statement to expect him to call. Would be expecting a raging beast to scream at her down the line, he supposed. Jackson, give me your phone. I need to talk to her. Jackson stared at him. He would know why he was using Jackson's mobile. She would likely be screening for the pack number. Nathan took the offered phone, and it didn't surprise him that it read J-Law. He hit the dial button and listened to it state, "Please check the number and dial again. The number you have called is not in service." He frowned at it, handed the phone back. Stephen looked directly at him. I'm going to square away J-Law and the pup's protection detail, then simply left the office with long strides. Ethan stood. I'd better go and help him. He looks cranky, and squaring away could mean kicking their asses to make sure they're up to the task. Nathan nodded. Ethan could very well be right. That left just him and Jackson in the office. What a shit show. Jackson sighed with a shake of his head. You're not kidding. Nathan agreed with him, walked over and sat down at his desk, turned to the legal documents from her office and found the company's phone number. It was still office hours over there, barely. He dialed the number and asked to be put through to J-Law's secretary to make an appointment. He was put on hold and saw Jackson's questioning look. Pretense. I'm certain all our names are being screened for. He handed the phone over to Jackson while on hold. She will likely talk to you rather than me. It took only a few minutes before he was actually put through to J-Law herself. Her secretary had caught his name and asked him to please wait on hold, didn't dismiss the call or tell him to bugger off. Jackson hit the speaker button, not that it was necessary. Nathan's wolf's hearing was perfectly fine. Yes, Jackson? She simply asked. Nil hesitation in her voice. She knew they were going to call. What do you think you are doing, J-Law? Do you even know what you did today? He asked right back sternly, but keeping all anger out of his voice. I didn't start this, Jackson.
He did.
He was the one who informed any wolf out there who happened to see his press conference that he had a weakness that could be exploited. Jackson frowned at her words. A weakness, not his pups. You didn't help by declaring yourself and the pups available for invitation into any pack that will accept you. I'm sure I will have plenty of offers rolling in, and quickly probably. She sounded slightly amused. Nathan and Havoc were both angered by her flippant disregard for the safety of their pups. Damn it, J-Law, he roared, unable to contain his beast or his own anger for that matter. She really needed to understand the danger she had just put herself into. The line disconnected before he could get anything else out. Episode 25. J-Law POV. She sat in her leather chair in her office and waited. The game of hardball had officially started. He had stupidly outed his children to the Wolfen Society, so she had declared herself a free agent that would entertain offers from other packs and let the other packs know that he had tried to harm her, and that was why she needed a new place to go. Not exactly the smartest thing to do, but she was sure to find a pack that either had no connection to him or was affiliated and had an alliance of some sort so she could have herself and the children protected. She would not have to tell him where she was either, just pledge her allegiance to the new Alpha and his pack, and then she would be gone from him and his Luna, who just wanted to hurt and punish her. J-Law knew there was a call coming. She was also pretty sure it wouldn't be him, probably Jackson. He was a smooth talker who could wheel and deal with the best of them. It had taken all of 15 minutes. She had already told Jordan, her secretary, to put him through, but give her a quick heads up first. She took the call but hung up the instant she heard her Alpha yell at her, full of rage and anger. He would learn. She would not take his abuse anymore, would not be yelled at like that day either. J-Law waited again, knowing full well that it was not over. Jackson would call back after talking his Alpha down and his friend into shutting up for the next phone call. It was a good 7 minutes before Jordan, her receptionist, put the call through again. He apologized, stating that it must have been disconnected. Somehow, J-Law laughed at his comment. Don't apologize, Jordan. I hung up on him and will likely do so again. But I will not receive any more calls from him today. This will be the last one, no matter how many times he calls back. Okay, J-Law. He apparently understood and seemed slightly amused. J-Law allowed Jackson to wait on hold a good 4 minutes before picking up again. Now that you know, I will hang up at will. Keep him under control and in check. I presume he is still listening. She was playing a deadly game, throwing out orders for an Alpha, but he would learn she had rights. After all, he had tossed her away. He is, Jackson confirmed, sounding angered with her now. He was losing his composure and clearly didn't like her attitude towards their Alpha. Unlike him, usually he was cool, calm, and collected, not the hothead. His Alpha was, if you hang up on me again, J-Law, I will get on the next flight out there and be at your door before you know it. Do you understand me? J-Law frowned. She got the threat loud and clear, but he'd be in her world, not his normal comfort zone. The rules were different here. Is that so? Are you prepared to play human, Jackson? I've been playing human for a very long time now. I don't think you can do it. Apollo will hate it, she smirked. He was a beta and his wolf. Apollo was dominant and would demand respect just as much as his alphas did. She heard the growl and knew it was his wolf, Apollo. He was pissed right off. She had challenged his wolf's control with her statement. J-Law had grown up with him. If he thought she didn't recall how to push all of their buttons, he was sadly mistaken. Oh, and if you think I haven't smelled a wolf here or there with pack scent on them since I got back from. She left it unsaid. Allow them to wonder where she had been and who with. She didn't care. Cora. She heard Havoc roar her wolf's name so loudly, she nearly jumped out of her skin. Cora nearly called his name back. J-Law barely had time to disconnect the call before Cora growled his name out of her. Lucky she had her finger on the disconnect button the whole time. He called to us, she whined, our Alpha. Yes, he wants to order you to bring your pups to him, Cora. Maybe, she huffed. No, he has a Luna, Cora. Don't mistake his intent. And his Luna hates us, one that will never tolerate our pup's existence. It's why we never told him in the first place, remember? Yes, she huffed again. She did recall, and she remembered the pain of his tossing them aside like a piece of garbage. He did not want them. Not her and Cora, just as pups, nothing more. She was not willing, they were not willing to just hand them over and walk away from being their mother, which is probably what he wanted. It had been a long and stressful day. Time to go home and see our babies. She knew that would make Cora happier. She loved her pups so much. Being away from them annoyed her some days more than others. And today she was itching to get back to them and cuddle up with them on the couch and eat popcorn and watch a movie. Yes, let's go. Cora agreed. Home they went to do just that. J-Law stepped out of the elevator on the 12th floor of Stanton & Co. law firm where she worked, to find the scent of wolves on the floor, to find Jordan waiting for her right there at the elevator. That was a bit of a surprise. He didn't normally wait for her here. He also seemed anxious. What's wrong, Jordan? She asked. There are so many messages this morning directed at you regarding your press conference statement, and people calling still trying to get appointments with you. It's kind of freaking me out, to be honest. Jayla laughed softly, and so it begins. I was expecting this. Just take one call at a time and go with it, okay, Jordan? Just breathe. Oh, and don't tell Eric. I think he'll get very angry. Jayla, he said, walking behind her slightly as they finally moved from the elevator and down the hall towards her office and his desk. Goddess, had he already informed Eric? If so, the man was likely in her office. As she got to her office, there, sitting on two of her waiting room chairs, was none other than Beta Jackson and Gamma Steven. No wonder Jordan was so nervous. It was not an angry Eric. It was two wolves. They were both sitting there giving off auras of power. Jackson glared right up at her. She simply waited for Jordan to take a seat behind his desk. How long have they been here? She asked him. They came up with me at 8. I did tell them you don't get until 9 today. They just sat and didn't move. Haven't said a word the whole time. Not to you, she thought to herself, probably been sitting here talking through the mind link with each other the whole time they have been here. She took the stack of messages he was holding out. She steadfastly refused to acknowledge either of them. She stood flicking through the messages in a slow manner, appearing unfazed by either of them. There were many pack corporations requesting that she call them. Episode 26. She turned to her office door. Do you have an appointment? She asked, glancing at Jackson, knowing full well that he did not. Jordan would have informed her already if they did. He was wearing a suit and tie, looked every bit the professional businessman, as did Steven for that matter. She took in their appearances. They had gotten bigger in the past 6 years, must be working out way more. She had not really taken much in on her last visit to the pack, too scared and terrified of the punishment that had been awaiting her to really get a good look at her old friends. No, but you will see me, Jayla, he stated in a flat, no-nonsense tone that implied he was going to get his way due to being the beta. I have court most of today. I suggest you make an appointment and come back for it. She turned to Jordan once more. Is there available space in my schedule tomorrow? She didn't want a very pissed of beta losing it here, so she would show some respect and get him that appointment she had mentioned. 11:30 for 15 minutes. He nodded at her after checking. Does that work for you? She asked with a soft laugh and walked into her office and closed the door. She didn't really care if it didn't. This was her world and not theirs. She had shown respect, then dropped it away. She headed to the courthouse and found they followed her. Neither said a single word to her, just sat in the back of the courtroom and watched her do her job and go head-to-head with other lawyers on her client's behalf. At the end of the day, she returned home to see them follow her there as well. Annoying indeed. Even Cora was feeling smothered. They were so used to being able to do as they pleased when they pleased, without any pack interference or supervision, that this was bothersome and annoying. She wondered for a moment if this was what it felt like to be under police surveillance. She had not returned to her office after the last court session, had simply gone home, getting there just on 5 p.m., surprising her babies and the nanny, who got to go home early. It was 7 p.m. when her intercom buzzed. Jayla frowned. She wasn't expecting anyone this evening. Tim hadn't called for a visit. She shrugged and answered, Yes, Jimmy. Evening, Jayla. There are 2 people here that would like to come up? She sighed. Probably Jackson and Steven, she thought. Names, please, Jimmy? She did like this building. Jimmy was a diligent doorman, and she could well imagine at this hour the night security guard Carlton would be standing by the front desk too. Jayla, it's Blaine and Darla. May we come up? Alpha Blaine's deep rumbling voice was heard through the intercom. Jayla was shocked, to say the least. She had not expected them to turn up here, at her apartment. It could only mean that Nathan had told them about the triplets. She was not prepared to deal with them at all. Biting her lip, she was quiet for about 10 seconds, then drew in a long breath and steeled herself to do the one thing she had never done before, deny them their request. No, I'm sorry, she said simply and as politely as she could, hoping not to incur their wrath at this time. Jayla, honey, please. Luna Darla's voice came through the intercom softly, no hint of anger or order in it. We'd just like to see our grandchildren is all. Jayla closed her eyes. It truly wasn't all that bad a request, but how could she know their true intentions, once up here in her apartment, alone with her and the pups? Either one of them could order her to hand them over. Order her to do anything for that matter. They could order her to hand them over and stay behind, effectively removing her precious babies from her. "I'm sorry," she said again, and actually meant it, truly did mean it. She was sorry for denying them to see their grand pups. She shut the intercom off, before guilt ate away at her. She really didn't know who to trust anymore. First Jackson and Steven showed up, and now the former Alpha and Luna. He was really sending everyone. He couldn't come himself due to human court orders currently restricting him from leaving the state his pack was in. She also knew that his human world passport had to be handed over, so no traveling outside the US either. Eric had put conditions on him due to his wealth, stating the man was a flight risk due to his money. He could go anywhere to get away from the charges against him. The courts agreed. Eric was good at his job. Apparently, Nathan had handed them over and was currently complying with human world restrictions. Jayla was about to order pizza for dinner when her phone rang. She glanced at it. Tim. He was one of the few people who had her new unlisted number. She picked it up. "Hey there." "Hi, sweets. Thought I'd drop by with pizza for dinner." "You're a lifesaver. I was actually just going to order pizza myself." "Great minds," he laughed. Jayla laughed too. "How far away are you?" "Just about to pull up outside your building." "Cheeky, aren't you?" "You know it, sweets. See you in a bit." He arrived 10 minutes later, and as he was on her approved list of visitors, he didn't have to be buzzed up. He brought 4 pizzas with him, knowing her, and the kids ate like horses. It always amazed him how much they all ate, but he'd gotten used to it. She put the kids to bed around 9, and that just left her and Tim on the couch. It was so nice to just snuggle on the couch with him. His arm was draped around her. Cora seemed a little off by his presence tonight, but Jayla put that down to a lot that had been going on of late and today, especially what with Apollo and Rafe trailing them everywhere they'd gone, ever present with Jackson and Steven. It would only be natural for her to feel a little off with the wolves she used to hang out with nearly every day of her life, probably making her feel nostalgic and out of sorts. Episode 27. "Are you staying the night?" Jayla asked casually, curious if he was here to have sex. They hadn't in a while. Actually, not since her ordeal. She was a little on the antsy side and was okay with him staying for sex. Cora huffed and retreated to the back of her mind. "I'd like to, but I have court in the morning and need to get up for an early start. Not free till Sunday, in all honesty." Okay, Jayla understood. She too had days where work exhausted her, or she needed to rest completely before she knew a huge day in court was ahead of her. Though he was a prosecutor, his job was more demanding of his time and much more stressful than hers, and although sex was a good stress relief, she knew she could be very demanding in bed, and though Tim liked that about her, told her sex was amazing, she knew he was always utterly worn out by her needs to be satisfied, and he could be tired all day the next day, which left him feeling unable to do his job to the best of his ability. She smiled up at him. "Sunday then?" He laughed at her, tapped her nose. "Definitely Sunday." He nodded. "Wanna walk me out?" He grinned at her. Jayla knew her children would be safe for 5 minutes while she walked him out to the front door and saw him off. He slid his arms around her waist once they stepped out the front door to the building. This was Tim's way of safely guarding himself from her sexual needs. His mouth found hers for a deep kiss. Cora rolled her eyes and turned away in her mind. Jayla ignored her. She had needs too, wanted to feel wanted, and Tim did want her. She felt his hands slide down her, over her body and grab her bottom, squeezing it, and she pressed herself against him and ground her hips into his. He groaned and she smiled against his lips. "You know you want to."
Milimetrów, Ido.
He pulled her harder against him, and she sighed softly into his mouth. She knew what he liked, and her antsiness just increased with the feel of him getting hard against her. He was turned on, and she wanted that, to know she could make him want her, that he did want her was a turn-on for her. "My sweet, please, I really do want to, but have a big day in court tomorrow." He groaned as she rocked herself against him harder, trying to convince him to stay. He pulled himself away from her a little reluctantly, his eyes slid over her body, totally checking her out. Jayla smiled and whacked his shoulder. "You're going to convince yourself to stay at this rate," she said with a devious smile on her face. It was what she wanted right now. Tim grinned at her. He knew she was right. He shook his head as if to clear it, then turned and walked away. Any more banter, and he wasn't going, and she knew it. She stood and watched him all the way to his car. He turned and looked at her, then yelled out, "When are you going to marry me?" Jayla yelled back, "When you actually propose," and dropped a neat curtsy to which he bowed back. Then they both burst out laughing and he got in his car and drove away. Jayla returned to her apartment. At least once a month, he would yell out at her. It had started 6 months ago, and her reply was always the same. Neither of them were actually serious. Well, at least she didn't think so. She had been dating Tim for the past 2 years now. Neither of them had the inclination to move in with the other. She had 3 very rambunctious children. They did seem to like him and he them, but she had always avoided the topic of who their father was when he had brought it up. He didn't like that she wouldn't tell him. He no longer asked anymore. She never really asked him about his family, just him. He had pursued her, and after doggedly chasing her for 6 months, Jayla had given him a chance. She knew she was never going back to the Wolfen Society, so she thought she might just try dating and see how she felt about it. Tim had turned out to be not only funny but charming and intelligent, and as his interests had aligned with hers, she'd found herself liking him quite a bit. It had been nice to have someone to talk to eat dinner with, and go out of their way to make her laugh. Sex had come quite unexpectedly. Jayla had not planned to sleep with him, but one night 3 months into their dating, he had pressed her up against the door roughly to his apartment as she had been about to leave, and kissed her hungrily, and her interest had somehow turned into wanton need. She had now put it down to the roughness of it, and she had just latched onto him, grinding herself against him all of a sudden. She had wanted to be touched. It had been so long since anyone had touched her, desired her, and when she'd felt his hard erection against her abdomen as he had ground himself against her hard and firm, that had been enough for her needs to outweigh everything else. Cora hadn't fought her about it, surprising her. Wolves were all primal wants and needs. Their sex drive was high, and they had not had anything in years. Jayla had moaned, "I want to have sex," right into his hungry kiss. He'd replied, "Thank God, so do I, sweets." And then he'd pulled her to his bedroom, and to his surprise, she had practically ripped his clothing off, shoving him down onto his bed and climbing on top of him. Tim had barely enough time to put protection on before she had lined herself up with him and slammed down onto him, taking him into herself hard and fast. She had ridden him damned hard that night. His hands had been on her naked body, roaming everywhere, touching her all over. She had sex with him 3 times that night, let him touch her, taste her, and rode the hell out of him. It was good and sated some of her needs, but not all of them. Only a wolf could actually sate her fully. Only a wolf could match her desires and needs. Tim was big for a human, but her last lover was bigger, hungrier, and more insatiable, and would never stop till she'd been screaming herself hoarse and was utterly exhausted and unable to move afterwards. That bastard had ruined her for all others. Jayla strolled into her bedroom after checking on her babies, still safe and sound, and turned on the shower. She would have to settle for sating her own needs today, and then wait for Sunday to come. She already knew Tim was going to be ridden. She was going to be on top and in control. It was normal for them, and Tim didn't seem to mind at all. Nathan POV. His phone rang. It was late. He'd been woken and wasn't sleeping well these days, and the few hours he did get, when he actually managed to fall asleep, were desperately needed. He glared at the stupid thing and wondered who the hell invented such an annoying thing. The phone's display showed him it was almost 1 in the morning. Steven's name glowing on the display. He glared at it. He had been asleep less than 2 hours, and he just knew whatever this phone call was, he was not going to be able to go back to sleep after it. He hit the answer button and then the speaker and buried his head back into his pillow, growling, "What?" Boss, we got a slight problem. Nothing too serious, human and all." He sighed. It was 10ish over there where he was. A human problem could only mean that he saw something he wasn't going to like, and the hesitation to spit it out annoyed him to no end. "Just say it, Steven," he sighed as he desperately tried to keep sleep knocking. "Well, Jayla just came out of her apartment with some human guy. We saw him go in around 7, but didn't know he was going to see her. They looked, well, hot and heavy, boss, and there was a bit of a heated discussion between him and Jackson. Don't do it, man, I have to, it's not a good idea kind of argument." Havoc was already filling with rage. "What? The word was snarled out of him. More havoc than him, his wolf demanded to know everything about his mate. Episode 28. He yelled out to her, "When are you going to marry me?" She replied, "When are you going to propose?" And that was it. Sleep was completely gone. He was only going to be coherent for a very short amount of time. Havoc was clawing his way out, wanting to destroy and kill everything that moved. Her not knowing he was her mate was infuriating, to say the least. Find out who he is and send a picture was all he managed to get out before Havoc took full control, and his wolf was ripped out of him and bolted from the pack house to hunt and kill anything that moved. His rage was completely unchecked due to the shitty circumstances of their very situation. Neither he nor Havoc could blame the girl. She had no idea they were her mate, and who's to say this wasn't her boyfriend, and if it was, it would be normal for her and Cora to spend time with him. This thought did not placate his beast in any way. Havoc had tried to call to Cora to let her know she was his mate and he wanted her, but Jayla had been in clear control and disconnected the call the minute Havoc had roared Cora's name. Whatever was going on in Jayla's brain, in regards to him and Havoc, appeared to override everything else. They had to gain some ground and soon, with the girl, or she was going to find herself hunted, forcibly marked and mated by his wolf, whether she liked it or not. Nathan would be hard-pressed to stop him if it came to actually seeing her in another man's arms, human or not. It wouldn't matter to Havoc at this point. He wanted his mate. He'd had her once before, they'd had her before, and knew how good it was to be in bed with her, to hear her scream his name, to have her warm body draped on top of his or his curled around hers. And although Havoc and Cora had never actually mated each other, due to not being mates, he had gotten to sit back and watch as Nathan had enjoyed touching every inch of the little she-wolf. She'd only been 19. He had been her first. It had not surprised him, since he'd known her all her life, never had a boyfriend that he'd seen. She'd come home from a semester of university and had just been hanging out with him and the boys, but they had all peeled away with their current flings. It had been late on a Friday night, and they'd been stretched out next to each other on his bed watching a movie in his room, something they had done 1,000 times before growing up. His wandering thoughts down memory lane seemed to be creating a noticeable change in Havoc's behavior, so he allowed himself to return to that night. He had looked down at her about to ask her if she wanted snacks or a drink, and he'd caught her staring at him, lust and desire written all over her face. She'd looked away hurriedly. A fierce blush covered her cheeks, and she had bitten her lower lip. He knew that look, had seen it on plenty of she-wolves. He, however, had never expected her to look at him with lust and desire. She couldn't hide it from him. He'd smiled and planned on teasing her, chiding her for having a crush on him. But when he had tilted her chin up with a single finger to make her look at him, something in him didn't want to tease her. Those damned green eyes of hers had trembled up at him with fear of rejection, and he'd simply leaned down and kissed her softly, at first thinking to take it slow, see if she actually did want him or if she was simply curious as to what it was like to kiss an alpha wolf. He was expecting the later. Nathan noted Havoc had come to a standstill, calming down as he followed along with Nathan's memory. The kiss had been soft and tender. He'd never seen her kiss anyone before, but she had. She parted her lips for his at the merest touch of his tongue, and when he'd slid his tongue into her mouth to deepen the kiss, she had not hesitated to slide hers along his. A part of him had actually felt a little disappointed he hadn't been her first kiss, but only barely. He'd watched her eyes flutter closed as he'd leaned his body over hers to fully deepen the kiss, to possess her mouth completely, and steal her breath away from her. Her hand had touched his face gently, sliding along his cheek to slip up into his hair. She had curled her fingers in it and pulled him even closer to her. He had allowed her to pull him closer. His body was reacting to their kiss a lot quicker than he had expected it to. He could smell her desire starting to fill the air around him. His hand had slid down her neck slowly, softly, to cup her breast, and the moan that had come out of her directly into his mouth had his cock twitching to life. He let out a soft growl back at her, unable to stop his primal response to the scent of her arousal and the soft moan she had made so full of pleasure. Nathan felt that Havoc had now settled himself down on the ground. His rage was ebbing away from him. Staying with the memory was good for him and his wolf. Nathan had slipped his hand down further, sliding it up under her shirt and pushing her bra aside to touch her bare skin, to tease her nipple with his thumb and forefinger. Her back had arched up to him. Oh goddess! He had known he was in trouble the minute the cry of pure pleasure had erupted from her mouth, breaking their kiss. He moved his mouth from hers, listening to her cry of pleasure, and had started kissing her neck. Soft sighs and moans were coming from her slightly parted lips. Arousal was flooding off of her in waves. She did want this. Before he knew it, he was pushing the shirt out of the way to kiss her hardened nipple, to suck on it firmly. She'd gasped and moaned, pressing her breast up into his mouth. He had bit down on her nipple and tugged it a little hard, and she'd near screamed her arousal and desire all he could smell now. He had shifted his whole body to lie on top of hers, a deep-seated groan coming from him as his cock became rock hard for her. He wanted her to feel his desire for her in that instant, to show her that she was turning him on so damned quickly. Her legs parted for him, without hesitation. She wanted to feel him, welcoming his weight, welcoming the feel of his hard cock against her hot and wet core. She was only wearing a pair of tights, and he'd ground against her slowly, deliberately, firmly. He wanted her to know how she had turned him on, and how damned hard he was for her. Even through his jeans, she was enjoying the feel of him. His hands pushed at her shirt until it was up and off of her altogether, and then she was braless as well. Nil objections from her at all. His mouth was on hers again, her breasts in his hands. Oh goddess, they had felt soft and silky smooth, perfectly filling the palm of his large hands. Her whole body was hot to the touch, and she was arched up to press her breasts into his hands as his lips claimed hers, as his tongue thrusting into her mouth demanding hot and needy, greedy to taste her, to devour her mouth with his. Her hips were rocking against him, hard and getting harder. She broke their kiss in her need to cry out with pleasure. Her hands pulled at his hips, and he started to thrust faster and harder until she was coming. He'd looked down at her at that moment, watched as her mouth had opened and her head had snapped back. Her green eyes were hidden from him for now as she finally screamed, her whole body arched up against his. Her feet were pushing at the mattress underneath her as she slammed her hips into his, grinding her now soaking wet pussy against his hard cock, as hard as she could to gain the top of her climax. Her orgasm was amazing to watch. Her green eyes had finally opened slowly to look up at him. She hadn't seemed to be self-conscious about what had just happened, had just smiled up at him, and then pulled his mouth back to hers. He recalled whispering her name, his tone full of need to take it further. She knew what he was asking and reached up to pull his shirt off. He'd sighed as her hands had made their way down his body, sliding her hands over his chest. She had teased his nipples the same way he had hers, pulling at them and rolling them between her fingers, before sliding down to trace his six-pack and dip lower. She'd pulled at the button of his jeans and unzipped him. His cock sprang out into her hand. He'd been him, or if she was simply curious as to what it was like to kiss an alpha wolf, he was expecting the later. Nathan noted Havoc had come to a standstill, calming down as he followed along with Nathan's memory. The kiss had been soft and tender. He'd never seen her kiss anyone before, but she had. She parted her lips for his at the merest touch of his tongue, and when he'd slid his tongue into her mouth to deepen the kiss, she had not hesitated to slide hers along his. A part of him had actually felt a little disappointed he hadn't been her first kiss, but only barely. He'd watched her eyes flutter closed as he'd leaned his body over hers to fully deepen the kiss, to possess her mouth completely, and steal her breath away from her. Her hand had touched his face gently, sliding along his cheek to slip up into his hair. She had curled her fingers in it and pulled him even closer to her. He had allowed her to pull him closer. His body was reacting to their kiss a lot quicker than he had expected it to. He could smell her desire starting to fill the air around him. His hand had slid down her neck slowly, softly, to cup her breast, and the moan that had come out of her directly into his mouth had his cock twitching to life. He let out a soft growl back at her, unable to stop his primal response to the scent of her arousal and the soft moan she had made so full of pleasure. Nathan felt that Havoc had now settled himself down on the ground. His rage was ebbing away from him. Staying with the memory was good for him and his wolf. Nathan had slipped his hand down further, sliding it up under her shirt and pushing her bra aside to touch her bare skin, to tease her nipple with his thumb and forefinger. Her back had arched up to him. Oh goddess! He had known he was in trouble the minute the cry of pure pleasure had erupted from her mouth, breaking their kiss. He moved his mouth from hers, listening to her cry of pleasure, and had started kissing her neck. Soft sighs and moans were coming from her slightly parted lips. Arousal was flooding off of her in waves. She did want this. Before he knew it, he was pushing the shirt out of the way to kiss her hardened nipple, to suck on it firmly. She'd gasped and moaned, pressing her breast up into his mouth. He had bit down on her nipple and tugged it a little hard, and she'd near screamed her arousal and desire, all he could smell now. Episode 29. He had shifted his whole body to lie on top of hers, a deep-seated groan coming from him as his cock became rock hard for her. He wanted her to feel his desire for her in that instant, to show her that she was turning him on so damned quickly. Her legs parted for him, without hesitation. She wanted to feel him, welcoming his weight, welcoming the feel of his hard cock against her hot and wet core. She was only wearing a pair of tights, and he'd ground against her slowly, deliberately, firmly. He wanted her to know how she had turned him on, and how damned hard he was for her. Even through his jeans, she was enjoying the feel of him. His hands pushed at her shirt until it was up and off of her altogether, and then she was braless as well. Nil objections from her at all. His mouth was on hers again, her breasts in his hands. Oh goddess, they had felt soft and silky smooth, perfectly filling the palm of his large hands. Her whole body was hot to the touch, and she was arched up to press her breasts into his hands as his lips claimed hers, as his tongue thrusting into her mouth demanding hot and needy, greedy to taste her, to devour her mouth with his. Her hips were rocking against him, hard and getting harder. She broke their kiss in her need to cry out with pleasure. Her hands pulled at his hips, and he started to thrust faster and harder until she was coming. He'd looked down at her at that moment, watched as her mouth had opened and her head had snapped back. Her green eyes were hidden from him for now as she finally screamed, her whole body arched up against his. Her feet were pushing at the mattress underneath her as she slammed her hips into his, grinding her now soaking wet pussy against his hard cock, as hard as she could to gain the top of her climax. Her orgasm was amazing to watch. Her green eyes had finally opened slowly to look up at him. She hadn't seemed to be self-conscious about what had just happened, had just smiled up at him and then pulled his mouth back to hers. He recalled whispering her name, his tone full of need to take it further. She knew what he was asking and reached up to pull his shirt off. He'd sighed as her hands had made their way down his body, sliding her hands over his chest. She had teased his nipples the same way he had hers, pulling at them and rolling them between her fingers before sliding down to trace his six-pack and dip lower. She'd pulled at the button of his jeans and unzipped him. His cock sprang out into her hand. He'd been. Leisure were only generating more wanton need in him till he could not hold back anymore, and he was slamming in and out of her as hard and fast as he could. She was screaming underneath him, her orgasm ripping through her body in waves. He could feel her coming, her wet pussy clenching and pulsing tightly around him. So damn tightly it was making it hard to thrust into her. Fuck, he roared as he came with her. Slamming deep, his seeds spilled inside of her. His mouth found hers as he rocked his hips gently against her, allowing the last of her orgasm to roll through her body. Fuck, it felt amazing. He'd slipped from her body and lay down next to her on his bed, his breathing ragged and heavy, his body slick with sweat, one hand flung up over his head as he tried to recatch his breath. He'd looked over at her, his lifelong friend, now his lover, and prayed this wouldn't ruin their friendship. Her eyes were closed. There was a smile on her lips. She was breathing as hard as he was. He watched her for many minutes as she had regained herself to normal, till her eyes had opened. She had turned them on him and bit her lip nervously. He had smiled at her. "You're amazing," he'd said with all honesty. She had blushed at his words, and he'd yanked her naked body against his to cuddle her. Havoc was practically purring at this moment. The shared memory of what it was like to be with their mate had calmed his beast right down. He gave control back to Nathan and relinquished his body and settled in the back of Nathan's mind, calm and sleeping. Nathan headed for the pack house. It took him an hour to walk there, but he didn't mind. To be honest, the night air was crisp and had a hint of rain in it. He looked up. Clouds filled the sky. Soon it would be snowing. Winter was on its way. Most days and nights were filled with clouds now. A deep chill permeated the air all day, every day, and even more of a night. He walked into the mudroom, showered, and headed for his bedroom in nothing more than a towel. It was late, and there was no one about, especially with his parents and brother off to sort out his human mate and placate her family. His Beta and Gamma were watching his mate. It was just Ethan, and his two sisters, Hallie, just 5 years old, was upstairs with a nanny due to his parents being away, and his other sister 2 years his junior, Abby, who was mated to Jackson's little brother Johnny, so lived on the Beta floor. He pulled on pants and grabbed his phone and headed back downstairs. Sleep was not going to happen, even though havoc was now out cold in his mind. He had to look at the photo he knew was waiting for him, a human man, his mate's possible lover. It was the only time to do it, with Havoc sleeping. It would keep his raging beast at bay and stop him from ripping out of him all over again. Nathan opened his phone. There was one message awaiting him. From Steven, as expected, he opened it. There was a photo of a man, tall, probably 6 feet, nothing to his 6 feet 6 inches. He was wearing dark slacks and a white dress shirt, standing next to a car. Nathan was thankful that it was just the man and not the two of them together. This man had dark hair, a standard short back and sides haircut, and was smiling. He guessed at J-Law. He was standing next to a silver Mercedes, not the latest model, but still on the expensive side, a luxury car. J-Law, it seemed, had surrounded herself with wealthy, good-looking humans. He was handsome by human standards. It was clear that the man worked out. He had broad shoulders and a tapered waist. Nathan sighed. How was it J-Law could surround herself by all the humans that were considered good-looking or handsome by human standards? He knew she was beautiful, smart, and funny, but why was it so darn hard for men to stay away from her? Nathan knew wolves were attractive to humans, eye candy and a half. He'd used his good looks, himself, to get his way. When around female humans, if there was trouble brewing between any unmated males of his pack and the humans, especially in the sexual department, human fathers were just as protective of their daughter's virtue as were wolfen parents. There was no name attached to the photo. Nathan hit Steven's number. It was nearly 4 a.m. His voice was groggy. Boss. Got a name. Timothy James Bolton. He's a prosecutor with Stanton and Co. law firm. Nathan rubbed his hands over his face. Just great, more freaking lawyers, and this one talking about marriage. He hung up, not wanting to know more at this point. He would sit and investigate the man himself, seeing as he was awake and sleep was long gone. At least his beast was out of the picture for the moment, so he could at least do a thorough job and uninterrupted. He knew Steven had more to impart, but didn't want to hear it, to be honest. He had enough to deal with. His parents had report leisure, were only generating more wanton need in him till he could not hold back anymore, and he was slamming in and out of her as hard and fast as he could. She was screaming underneath him, her orgasm ripping through her body in waves. He could feel her coming, her wet pussy clenching and pulsing tightly around him. So damn tightly it was making it hard to thrust into her. Fuck. He roared as he came with her, slamming deep, his seed spilled. Inside of her, his mouth found hers as he rocked his hips gently against her, allowing the last of her orgasm to roll through her body. Fuck, it felt amazing. He'd slipped from her body and lay down next to her on his bed, his breathing ragged and heavy, his body slick with sweat, one hand flung up over his head as he tried to recatch his breath. He'd looked over at her, his lifelong friend, now his lover, and prayed this wouldn't ruin their friendship. Her eyes were closed. There was a smile on her lips. She was breathing as hard as he was. He watched her for many minutes as she had regained herself to normal, till her eyes had opened. She had turned them on him and bit her lip nervously. He had smiled at her. "You're amazing," he'd said with all honesty. She had blushed at his words, and he'd yanked her naked body against his to cuddle her. Havoc was practically purring at this moment. The shared memory of what it was like to be with their mate had calmed his beast right down. He gave control back to Nathan and relinquished his body and settled in the back of Nathan's mind, calm and sleeping. Nathan headed for the pack house. It took him an hour to walk there, but he didn't mind. To be honest, the night air was crisp and had a hint of rain in it. He looked up. Clouds filled the sky. Soon it would be snowing. Winter was on its way. Most days and nights were filled with clouds now. A deep chill permeated the air all day. Every day, and even more of a night. He walked into the mudroom, showered, and headed for his bedroom in nothing more than a towel. It was late, and there was no one about, especially with his parents and brother off to sort out his human mate and placate her family. His beta and gamma were watching his mate. It was just Ethan, and his two sisters, Hallie, just 5 years old, was upstairs with a nanny due to his parents being away, and his other sister 2 years his junior, Abby, who was mated to Jackson's little brother Johnny, so lived on the beta floor. He pulled on pants and grabbed his phone and headed back downstairs. Sleep was not going to happen, even though havoc was now out cold in his mind. He had to look at the photo he knew was waiting for him, a human man, his mate's possible lover. It was the only time to do it, with Havoc sleeping. It would keep his raging beast at bay and stop him from ripping out of him all over again. Nathan opened his phone. There was one message awaiting him. From Steven, as expected, he opened it. There was a photo of a man, tall, probably 6 feet, nothing to his 6 feet 6 inches. He was wearing dark slacks and a white dress shirt, standing next to a car. Nathan was thankful that it was just the man and not the two of them together. This man had dark hair, a standard short back and sides haircut, and was smiling. He guessed at J-Law. He was standing next to a silver Mercedes, not the latest model, but still on the expensive side, a luxury car. J-Law, it seemed, had surrounded herself with wealthy, good-looking humans. He was handsome by human standards. It was clear that the man worked out. He had broad shoulders and a tapered waist. Nathan sighed. How was it? J-Law could surround herself by all the humans that were considered good-looking or handsome by human standards. He knew she was beautiful, smart, and funny, but why was it so darn hard for men to stay away from her? Nathan knew wolves were attractive to humans, eye candy and a half. He'd used his good looks, himself, to get his way. When around female humans, if there was trouble brewing between any unmated males of his pack and the humans, especially in the sexual department, human fathers were just as protective of their daughter's virtue as were wolfen parents. There was no name attached to the photo. Nathan hit Steven's number. It was nearly 4 in the morning. His voice was groggy. Yeah, boss. Got a name. Timothy James Bolton. He's a prosecutor with Stanton and Co. law firm. Nathan rubbed his hands over his face. Just great, more freaking lawyers, and this one talking about marriage. He hung up, not wanting to know more at this point. He would sit and investigate the man himself, seeing as he was awake and sleep was long gone. At least his beast was out of the picture for the moment, so he could at least do a thorough job and uninterrupted. He knew Steven had more to impart but didn't want to hear it, to be honest. He had enough to deal with. His parents had report.
Full story is available at novelpalace.com. Click the link in the comment section to get it free.